Hello. Coming to you from the sanctuary at First Christian Church, Rocky Mount, North Carolina. This is for Sunday, March 7th, 2021. The videos on the website are broken up today in different pieces to take advantage of being able to be in this space. I think it's important for us to see the familiarity of this place, and there might be a chance that we can be together a little sooner than we thought. I'm going to share some ideas about the scriptures that are on the page there. But first, I just want to give thanks for being back in this room. The echo is a little bit strong because there aren't people here, but hopefully that will change soon. My bride says that I do a couple things that continue to annoy her, and I'm sure all of us can share our COVID stories about spending an awful lot of time together inside. And I don't mean the things that are annoying, like forgetting where my wallet is, the forgetful little stuff, but more the big, I just don't remember some things. What were Duncan's first words again? Oh yeah, I remember. I have a very long memory about when people have done me wrong or things that I regret, but the good things somehow just slip right out of my mind. COVID brain, they say, is a real thing for those who have had this illness. But even if you haven't had COVID, my guess is during quarantine, we've all slipped at least a little bit. Memory is important. Not having memory is a real struggle. Worship is worship because we forget things. It's a reminder, this opportunity for thanking God for the things that are apparent and the myriad things that we don't even remember or think about. Worship is a reminder and the opportunity to thank God for the blessings that we may have forgotten during the busyness of the week. The writer of our psalm today finds himself putting pen to paper to write down the things that he remembers. That's the other thing that I do that annoys my bride. I talk to myself. I do it out loud. I'll run into the store to grab something. She'll stay in the car. I'll come back to the car. I'll get in. And the first thing she says is, "Who are you talking to?" And I'll say, "What?" And she'll say, "You were talking. Your lips were moving the entire time you were walking back to the car." Who are you talking to? Myself. Out loud. Our psalmist today is having a conversation in his head. A reminder that he's on the verge of forgetting some things, and that he thinks if he reminds himself, it would also be helpful for some other people to hear. He calls these things the benefits of God. As an advertiser, I understand benefits. I encourage clients all the time not to talk about negativity, not to talk about obstacles, and certainly don't talk about anybody else or anybody else's business. You talk about the benefits of you. What's a benefit of buying your product or using your service? Benefit, benefit, benefit. And we forget that sort of tangible, physical, palpable identity of God. That's such a benefit to us. The benefits of God. And the psalmist just lists them here for us. He has this conversation with himself, and I can almost see him saying, "Oh yes, and this. And oh, don't forget about that." Hoping to put himself in a better frame of mind than where he was just the psalm before. Thinking about what he has been through and how God lifted him up out of this dark place. You don't have to go far in the Psalms. You can go back just one, the one right before this, and there were some low places described. This is very real language for very real life. Thankfully, the psalmist reminds us that every day we benefit from our relationship with God. Forgiveness, healing, saving from hell, from the pit, he says. The pit, what an interesting image. I've always thought it was kind of strange that on the North Carolina campus, UNC, right outside of the student union, the student store, is an area called the pit. And the steps go down 2 or 3 steps in the brick around there, and students will sit on the steps, and it's a very big square. And occasionally, somebody will walk up and they'll set down a box and they'll stand up on it, the old soapbox, and they will be a pit preacher shouting hellstone and fury, fire, brimstone at these students sitting around enjoying the sunshine. The pit in the psalmist's day is an image of where one goes when one dies, or where one goes when one is in exile. The image of helplessness and fear, dark and sad and tragic. The psalmist has seen some stuff and experienced some things, and wants us to know that God even has a reach in those places. I like the fact that he's honest. He lays it out. He speaks of these things. A lot of times we avoid those subjects. We don't talk about it. He talks about it, but he doesn't linger there. He doesn't stay there in the darkness. This real dark, sad place, this hopeless example that he lays out. Immediately there is an honest and kind reminder of God's steadfast love. We talked the last couple of weeks about the Hebrew word chesed. It's a concept of God's depth of grace. Mercy, don't forget mercy. Benefit, 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 benefit. And thankfully, the psalmist just keeps piling on the benefits, the good stuff. Don't forget that God satisfies you with a lifetime of good things and even provides you with those times of renewal when you feel strong and vigorous and once again young. The imagery here is powerful. It cuts to the core so that our youth is renewed as an eagle. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be amazing? To have the youthful energy of a little kid running around and running around and running around, having that kind of exuberance for life, youthful energy. Wouldn't it be great? Just before our text, Psalm 102, David cries out in the depth of despair, but he doesn't stay there. My heart is stricken, it's withered like grass. I'm lonely like a bird on top of a house. All day long, my enemies taunt me. They use my name as a curse. Ugh, yuck. And in the bottom of the valley, there's a decision. How do you respond? Do you stay there? So he talks to himself. The tennis player raising the fist after a great shot. Yes. Charlie Brown. Good grief. The internal monologue, the self-talk, the inner speech, the discourse that we have in our head, running the verbal monologue of thought. Self-talk is that voice in your head that encourages you mustering the strength to pull yourself up from where you are, from wherever those dark places are. That commentary that reminds you of who and whose you are. This premise of self-talk is what you say in your mind compels you to feel differently than you feel now about who you are perceived to be and how you want to be that. If you have a negative voice on the inside, it's likely you're going to be a negative person on the outside. If you have a positive internal voice, you tend to be a positive person on the outside. I can't believe how out of shape I am. I can't do this. And I'm going to mess this up. You catch yourself doing that sometimes? Me too. It almost was peril for the psalmist, the author of this psalm that's in front of us today from so long ago. At the deepest point in his life, something compels him to muster a little bit of positive self-talk. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that's within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and do not forget all his benefits. You better start writing them down because you're going to forget. His despair made him forget. When you're in the middle of a crisis, you don't think about the good stuff. But he didn't stay there. He didn't linger there. Maybe a spirit pulled him out of it. I forget all the time. I was introduced to some wonderful people not 20 minutes ago, and I don't remember their name. If I saw it on paper, I'd say, oh yeah, I remember. I'm terrible at that. I'm in a terrible occupation to be terrible at that. Did those sorts of things bother you too? I'm embarrassed when I forget a name. We've even got a little code. Jennifer and I do this little thing that we say, and if we say it one way, we introduce ourselves and get that name back out to hit the ears again. Forgetfulness can be a big problem, getting us into predicaments, and it can leave us in dark places where we forget who and whose we are. But I'm reminded today that taking blessings and people for granted is even worse than forgetting a name. Marriages and friendships, relationships fall apart when they're not tended to, when you forget about the importance of them. And worse, the psalmist reminds us, taking God for granted. Not good. The predicament for David is that he's on the verge of forgetting the character of a gracious God, the benefits of a relationship with a gracious God. So he models for us exactly what we need to do when we find ourselves looking up from the bottom of a pit. This psalm reveals to us what we need to do when we're on the wrong end of things. The opposite of forgetfulness isn't the rare time that we remember. The opposite of forgetfulness is not when we find the car keys that we've been looking for or actually buy all the things on the grocery list when we go into the store. The opposite of forgetfulness is the time that we remember all the benefits of God. The opposite of forgetfulness is praise and thanks. Because when you remember all the benefits of a relationship with God, you can't help but respond with praise. Praise for the character of God. Praise for the gift of life. Praise that we're all still in the game, still in the arena, still in the business of living. Praise for the benefits of relationships that extend far beyond our expectations or our understandings of them. The Hebrew language says that God redeems our life from the darkest places. We cannot linger there if we're in relationship with God. It's not that we choose not to, it's that we cannot. We were created to be greater than that dark place. The word redeem has that history in Hebrew. Stories about buying cattle or sheep or property to save it from misuse or loss at the hands of somebody who takes it for granted or who doesn't know what to do with it. Saving ourselves from exile or the bottom of the pit. God pulls us out of those places. Not based on merit, but based on the character of God's self. Based on grace. And apparently in God's eyes, you and I are worth it. I don't understand it. We are among the special recipients of love and mercy, and no committee or legislation can ever take that away. The psalm speaks of the inclusive nature of God's love, steadfast love. It recalls the Exodus event when the faithful found themselves exiled. The central act of God's deliverance in the Hebrew Bible is a physical, historic living out of God's chesed. God's chesed happened then and it happens now. The physical presence of God's love and grace. Verse 8. Look at verse 8. Verse 8 is like a creed. It's like the core. It's like the central linchpin. It's like the cornerstone. It's an absolute that stands in the center of the entire remembering, the statement of who God is, God's character. Merciful. That kind of affection that a mother has for a child that cannot be changed. Merciful, the kind of appreciation that a sculptor has for his work. It cannot be altered. Merciful, the kind of inspiration a lyricist feels when a turn of phrase makes him cry or makes him jump for joy and dance and laugh out loud. Merciful is the core of God's character, and we cannot help but give thanks when we realize it, when we experience it, when we share it, when we give it and receive it. I posted the video of Godspell on the website. It's pretty great. I hadn't seen it in a really long time. I was born right after that hippie generation. So Jesus Christ Superstar was more my thing. It was a little bit bigger and louder and more orchestrated, and for some reason that falls on my ear better. The Godspell, it was too groovy for me. But that song so clearly articulates how God's love is steadfast. It's just the core of who and whose we are. The Lord does not deal with us according to the readout of a cosmic computer somewhere, keeping track of our misdeeds. No matter how much people want to tell us that's how God works. God works with the kind of love a parent has for a child. Can't help it. How can we respond to that with anything but thanks? God's chesed, that love, is as high as the sky and as wide as the distance from east to west. You can travel and you think that you've arrived at the destination, and then you look on the horizon and you realize there's more, and you just keep going. God's chesed, steadfast character, is bigger and wider and deeper than we can even imagine, deep enough even to pull us out of dark places. Appropriately for Lent, this steadfastness of God, this chesed of God, shows that God loves us, knowing full well that we are fallible, that we are weak, we are vulnerable. From dust we came, and to dust we shall return. And God's steadfast love is so everlasting that frailty on our part doesn't matter. Our lives are temporary. God's life is not. And there is no response other than praise. I love this song. And I like saying it in Lent because it gives me the good news, that hope that's not a fleeting kind of temporary hope, but is a real core depth of hope. God satisfies us with good, the psalm says. You satisfy a hungry heart with gift of finest wheat. Come to us, O saving Lord, the bread of life to eat, we sing. God satisfies us with good for as long as we live. Forgives, heals, redeems, crowns, satisfies. This Lenten season, you and I are invited to see things as God sees them, to view things the way God views them, and that includes ourselves. We talk a lot about seeing the world through God's eyes, but we forget to see ourselves that way. We look in the mirror and we see imperfections. We see this blemish or that hair out of place. Not how God sees it. Our lives might need to reflect the way our hearts have been formed. And the good news this morning is that you and I can rewrite our story according to God's view, not only of the world, but God's view of us. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that's within me, bless his holy name.